So the Trump is seen as the such a threat that the moment he said he was going to run again, they escalated the New York lawfare against him, escalated the federal lawfare against him. And the question was always, would they cross that Rubicon? They partially crossed it with the New York case. But the New York case was kind of seen as so laughably absurd, even with people like Bill Barr, who has been a deep state hatchet man his whole career, whole life. I mean, his dad was the Dalton School headmaster, very elite school. A certain, current Secretary of State went there. A range of people went through the Dalton School. Of course, so the last thing his dad did before he stepped down as headmaster and decided to write science fiction books that glorified underage sexual assault, a little bit of an odd thing to write as a headmaster, was, of course, to recommend one Jeffrey Epstein to be a math teacher at Dalton School. Barr was the only son of a wealthy family in Upper West Side. He's one of those nerds that played the tuba. He's one of those kind of people. But mommy liked him a lot. It's like with Joe Biden always. We'll talk about Joe Biden being a mini LBJ here in a second. But similar, Bill Barr reminds me of aspects of that kind of, mommy said I'm smart personality. Goes on to get his political pedigree through the Bush family. Was working for Poppy Bush when Poppy Bush was at the CIA, burying all the evidence from the Church Committee about CIA misconduct and malfeasance. Bush brings him into the Justice Department when he becomes vice president. It's Bill Barr that helps with Robert Mueller preside over everything during the Poppy Bush administration that helped bury everything connected to Noriega, which involved all the drug running, all the money laundering, that included arms running, that included all kinds of illicit activity. We use Noriega as our guy going all the way back to the 70s, in fact. But so that's who Bill Barr is. He suckered his way into the Trump administration by promising to end the Mueller investigation, which had multiple levels of irony because he and Mueller go way back. But Mueller was at the end of his rope. They had no proof that investigation had served its purpose to cover up the criminality of the deep state and the initial spying on Trump. And then used it as a perfect controlled opposition kind of position because it's under Barr that Jeffrey Epstein dies. Eternal truth number one: Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself. As I like to say, but it's also under Bill Barr that the election issues happen, and he claims there's no problems. I mean, Bill Barr's failure to use the Justice Department to make sure we had elections people could have confidence in 2020 is part of the problem in 2020. And then it's Bill Barr who buries, as we now know, all the Biden corruption that he had evidence of since 2017. And it's not a coincidence, the centerpiece of that Biden family corruption, though it extends geographically and time-wise far beyond Ukraine, the core of it currently is all about Ukraine. And so I think as you look at those combined issues, Trump was the main obstacle all along, and Trump is still seen as the main obstacle. So they've decided to cross the Rubicon with this prosecution in the state New York case. Barr acknowledged it was so weak that he was basically calling for, by predicting, he was calling for a federal indictment of Trump by the deep state allies. And that's who Jack Smith is. It's not a coincidence the guy's over at the International Criminal Court frequently, right? It's not, the kind of people that are at the International Criminal Court are not your great human rights advocates of the world, given how incredibly selective they are at the International Criminal Court with who gets prosecuted for so-called international crimes and who does not. So Jack Smith and he's also a political hitman who's mostly known for, if he's assigned a case, he brings an indictment, regardless of whether the case is any good. Jack Smith was involved in the John Edwards prosecution. That was the Democratic sort of left populist Senate candidate who got taken out over a sex scandal, and they criminally prosecuted it as a campaign finance violation. There was many people at the time who said that it was a completely bogus legal theory that was being pursued. Ultimately, the jury wouldn't convict, and so the case never reached full appellate review. But Smith lost that case, and Smith's people did. Same with he went after a Virginia governor on an honest services theory of RICO fraud that was unanimously rejected by the United States Supreme Court as bogus all along. So he's not known as an intellectual bright light. He's not known as a legal heavyweight. He's not known as a great trial lawyer. He's known as a deep state affiliated hitman who will bring an indictment if he's assigned a case, whether he wins or loses. Clearly, the deep state believes that Trump is still the greatest threat, and they believe that weaponizing the Justice Department is their means to prevent him from reoccupying the White House in 2025. The other aspect of this is they're trying to establish a legal precedent, which is that we now have a national security state, deep state, whatever you want to call it, that has legal power over our secrets. And this has been the long objection of Julian Assange, that the corruption of our governments around the world, the most horrific things our governments around the world do, depend on one thing above all else: secrets. And that exposing those secrets became part of his kind of life mission. But his bigger political philosophical point was this is the greatest danger. That if you want to take out deep states around the world, take out secrets, remove their capacity to keep secrets, remove their ability to sustain secrets. Do that, and the core of their power collapses. So what are they doing here? They're saying here that the elected president of the United States cannot share the deep state secrets with anyone without their permission, or if he does, if he shares it with the people, if he shares it with the public, if he shares it with an investigative journalist, then he goes to prison. That's the precedent they want to set here. That's how insane the precedent is from a constitutional perspective, because there is no constitutional place for the deep state. There really isn't. Its only existence is pursuant to the president creating it for the president's purposes. The executive power under Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution is exclusively vested in the president of the United States. Congress can't change that. The courts can't change that. They try, but constitutionally they can't change that. And so the president, things are kept a secret for the benefit of the president. So the idea that the president could be forced to keep a secret is kind of insane, because the whole point is solely for him. He's in this case, the elected embodiment of the people. So by saying that the deep state, the administrative state, the national security state, that some agency can have power over the president, flips the constitutional order and creates a legal, administrative, bureaucratic state who can use the power of secrets to elevate themselves over the elected branches of the people, the elected representatives of the people. And in that process, completely contort, distort, and destroy the entire constitutional framework. And that's the scarier part of the Trump case, is that it wants to establish a deep state precedent. That's why I've said people can think whatever they want about Donald Trump. This case is democracy versus Donald Trump. It's democracy versus the deep state, not the U.S. versus Donald Trump, fundamentally. So does constitutional democracy survive? Or does the deep state now have legal precedent that they can even lock up the president for sharing the deep state secrets with the American people?